Tony can be the whole montage. He's here. Okay, we are live and it is 7 o'clock, so I will call to order this second monthly meeting of the Village of Phillipsburg Board of Trustees. Do we have any changes to the agenda? I saw an executive session in there, right? Yes. Okay, then next.
I would like to change the name of the packet where they need the street address assignment, which you can review when you get there. There's an additional number added to the parcel associated with 50 next year.
Okay. Do we have a consent agenda tonight? Item number 3 we'll remove. There's no consent agenda this evening.
We do have an executive session, you said?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, then without further ado, we'll move on to item number 4 on the agenda, which is the presentation of our annual audit. This would be for the fiscal year ending May, the end of May of 2023. And as he does every year, Dwayne from Sarah will tell us how we're doing.
Well, thank you for a few minutes this evening to review the results of the audit for you. You have our packets in front of you.
Okay, thank you. So I want to just touch briefly on, there are 2 letters that are on top of the financial report itself. I just want to touch on those really briefly, and then just spend a few minutes kind of walking through the report, letting you know where everything is, hit a couple of the highlights. So the first letter that's right on top is titled Communication with Those Charged with Governance at the Conclusion of the Audit. This letter is pretty standard boilerplate language. When we're done with an audit, we have to make sure that you, the board, is aware of certain aspects of the audit. So that's what this is for. There was a change in accounting standard that was effective during the year, but didn't have any impact on the financial statements. A new standard on leases in the way that they're accounted for in governments took effect during the year under audit. We looked at the leases that the village has. None of them were material enough or significant enough to change the way that those are reported in the financial statements. So no impact from that new standard. There's always estimates as part of financial statements. We evaluated the estimates, we evaluated the underlying assumptions, and didn't have any concerns with how those estimates are considered or calculated. We looked through the disclosures, through the footnotes as part of the financial statement process, and we didn't have any concerns with those disclosures, with how they're presented. The wording is clear, is consistent from year to year. No difficulties, no disagreements with management during the conduct of the audit. So, yeah, so that letter is pretty much boilerplate stuff. The other letter is entitled Management Comment Letter. So we use the comment letter for a couple of things. If there are things that come to our attention during the audit process that we want the board to be aware of, we use this letter for that purpose. And then we also use this letter to bring you up to date if there are further upcoming changes in accounting standards, auditing standards, anything like that, that we think you need to be aware of. So there is a comment at the bottom of the first page, continuing on to the second page. This is a continuing comment with respect to the difference between cash accounting and accrual accounting. So we did record some adjustments for some accounts receivable, things that were, received after year end, but related to the May 31, 23 fiscal year. So the numbers that are in here include those adjustments, but we wanted you to be aware of that, that those adjustments did take place during the audit process. And then in the middle of the second page of the comment letter, there's reference to a couple of upcoming changes in accounting standards. So there's a new statement on what are called subscription-based information technology arrangements, which basically means computer software. And so that standard is going to be effective for the May 31, 2024 audit. If there are significant arrangements, it'll just change the way that those are reported and accounted for. And when we, do next year's audit, we'll take a look at the arrangements that you have in place and decide if any of those need to be accounted for differently. And then the year after that is a change in what are called compensated absences, basically paid time off, in the way that those are accounted for. So that's going to be effective for May 31 of 2025. And essentially the main change that's going to take place there is under current accounting standards. If people are just going to use time off but can't get paid for it when they leave, retire, whatever, it doesn't get recorded. And under this new accounting standard, basically anything that accrues and can be earned and used at a later time is subject to recording. So most likely there will be an increase in the amount that's recorded, but some of the calculations are going to need to be done, in a couple of years when that statement becomes effective. So, okay. So that's both of the letters. And then the rest of what I have for you is the financial report itself. We've issued an unmodified opinion, a clean opinion on the financial statements, means that we believe that they're fairly stated in accordance with accounting principles, and don't require any modifications. If you're not going to read through all 45 pages, I won't be offended. I'll try to be okay with it. But I would encourage you, if nothing else, to read through the management's discussion and analysis, because in just a few pages, that gives you a good sense of where things are from a financial picture. Now, a lot of the information that's in here is written more from the government-wide format as opposed to the fund basis, general fund, water fund, sewer fund format that you're used to dealing with on a day-to-day and month-to-month basis. But I think a lot of the information that's in there is really helpful when you look at the government-wide aspect of those things. And you look at more than just the funds, you consider the capital assets, you consider the long-term debt and other long-term obligations and things like that. So most of what's in that management's discussion and analysis is written from that government-wide perspective. There are some nice charts and some nice graphs in there that I think are helpful for you to get a sense of things. Page 4B, for instance, has a nice figure 1. So this is a condensed statement of net position, doesn't show any of the detail, but it does show you the village's assets, liabilities, and net position, again, on that government-wide basis. The total net position of the village declined just a little bit from May of 22 to May of 23, just a decrease of $64,000. Total net position remains around 10.7 million. Most of that number is capital asset investments. The restricted, all the reserve funds, is about $2.7 million. And then the unrestricted portion is actually a deficit, just a little bit, a deficit of $100,000. And that more than anything reflects the fact that the statewide pension liability, the village has a small share of that, and there's no assets to offset it. So that's really what causes that deficit more than anything else. The next page has another chart that shows the revenues and expenses, again, on the government-wide basis, shows you how you got to that small deficit that took place during the year. Compares it to last year. where you actually had an increase in that position of about $500,000. So you can see the comparison, 1 year to the next, mostly a decrease in revenue in the current year compared to the year prior. Expenses were pretty stable year to year, and expenses fell a little bit in the current year compared to the year prior. The financial statements themselves begin on page 5, and page 5 and 6 are those government-wide financial statements, the same things that are in figure 1 and 2, but with a lot more detail, so that you can see, more information there. And then the fund basis financial statements, the ones that you're more used to seeing and working with on a regular basis, those begin on page 7. The fund basis balance sheet is page 7. The fund basis statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance is page 9. If you look at page 7 for a minute, you see that total assets across all the funds are roughly $4.5 million on that fund basis. Liabilities around 1.2 million, and so total fund balance across all the funds together is about 3.1, almost 3.2 million dollars. If you look at page 9, you'll see the changes in fund balance for each of the funds. The general fund had an increase in fund balance of about $580,000 from end of 22 to the end of 23. Sewer fund had a slight increase, and then the water fund and the other funds had decreases during the year. And all told, across all the funds, an increase in fund balance of almost $400,000. The notes to the financial statements begin on page 11. I'm going to skip ahead quite a bit. There is a lot of summary information about accounting policies. Those didn't change really from last year to this, so I'm going to skip ahead a little bit and go all the way up, if I could, to page 22 of the bound packet. So there's a chart on here. So this is a note related to capital assets, and this just shows the beginning balances, the activity, new capital assets, depreciation expense that was recorded, and the ending balance. The village added roughly $100,000 in new capital assets during the year, mostly equipment. Depreciation expense that was recorded was about $775,000. So on a net basis, capital assets declined by about $675,000 in their value. Couple pages ahead, page 24 is this is part of the note on long-term debt. And the table that's on the top half of page 24 shows the different bonds that are outstanding and the different installment purchase debt issuances that are outstanding as of the end of the fiscal year. In total, about $6.9 million in debt outstanding as of May 31 of 2023. And then the next page shows a table of how that debt is scheduled to be paid off over time, all the way out to 2049. So I can't wait to come and talk to you about that when we're done. It's only 25 years away when all that debt will be paid off. The pension note begins on page 26. It goes for several pages, provides some information about the assumptions and about the obligations. So a few years ago, the accounting for pensions changed, and now the statewide pension system has an actuary that calculates the statewide liability, and then all of the participating employers report a very small share of that liability. And there's a chart at the bottom of page 31 that I think is helpful, and it shows the village's share of the ERS liability is about $730,000. The village's share of the PFRS liability is about $200,000 as of the end of the year. And those are quite a bit higher than they were a year ago, mostly because during that year, the stock market didn't do so well. And so the assets under investment fell compared to the obligations. There are budgetary comparison schedules. Those are pages 34 through 36 in the back of the report. And those pages show how the village's actual activity did compared to the budgets. And then there's also some supplemental information in the back related to the pension system and some of those obligations. And then all the way to the very last couple of pages of the bound packet, page 44 and 45. Because we do the audit in accordance with government auditing standards, we're also required to issue a report on internal control and compliance. That's what those last two pages are. That report identified no significant deficiencies, no material weaknesses in the control system, and no non-compliance with laws and regulations. So all in all, a good report. Couple things that are in the comment letter to work on, but all in all, not bad, not scathing.
Not skating.
I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Any questions for Dwayne?
Dwayne, can you explain what general governmental support means? What that includes in that category?
Sure. So that's basically, it includes town board, it includes the mayor and expenditures from it, includes the finance office, includes the building and operations and maintenance and things like that. And then if it's legal or engineering or any of those types of expenditures, those are all included under that general governmental support category.
Right, so it's pretty catchable.
Yeah. Yep.
Other questions? Thank you so much.
Okay. You're welcome.
Appreciate it as always.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. Next item on our agenda is our public hearing on draft local law D. Is it D1?
It's D1.
Of 2024. This is the same local law we have passed every year since 2000, what was it, 12?
12, 13, maybe.
This local law would allow the village to adopt a budget next month that overrides the tax levy limitations of General Municipal Law Section 3C. For those not familiar, in the 2011-12 timeframe, New York State passed and adopted a law which restricted how much local municipalities and school districts could increase their tax levy to no greater than 2% or some calculation relative to inflation, unless they adopted a local law to override that each year by a supermajority, so a 4/5 vote of this board. The village has chosen to override this levy every single year, even when we did not need to raise the tax levy by more than that percentage, primarily as a statement about our sovereignty when it comes to crafting our budgets. And so with that, I would entertain a motion to open the public hearing on local law D1 of 2024.
So moved.
Second. We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
And we are now in our public hearing for draft local law D1 of 2024. If any members of the public in person or online would like to comment, please do. If you're joining us via Zoom and would like to comment, either raise your hand on screen or with the raise hand feature, just so I know you want to make a comment.
It would be.
Scott, go right ahead.
Okay, well, thank you, guys. I watched the town meeting from a couple weeks ago and I was impressed with all the work that you guys have done. And I've also, I wrote a letter last week, and for the other people who are on the Zoom, my letter, I understand the need to override the cap, and I understand the pressures the village is up against, but my main concern about the village budget was not really this year or even next year, but is the village budget has increased at an average rate of like over 5% a year for the past 7 years, which is, double the rate of inflation. If we extend that out another 20 years, at some point, the village taxes would be like double what the town and county are, and would start to approximate the school taxes. So my main concern is just sort of the long-term impact of increasing the taxes above the rate of inflation. I've had a lot of good responses from Ben, and I've been back and forth, and Marcia and I went back and forth. Rord and I met, and I'm starting to understand, the complexities of what you're up against. I think that the EMS is probably since it's the largest portion of the budget, is an area we probably need to look at, maybe not so much as the numbers, the staffing. I think that's really up to you, but I think my concern is that maybe the cost sharing that we're doing with the other municipalities may not be fair to the village of Trumansburg, and I think that's something we need to look at more closely. So, I don't think it's something you're going to resolve today or tomorrow or this year, but I do think that when we expand the size of the EMS in the next couple of years and build a new facility, that we really have to take a step back and see if there's a better way to track those costs. Maybe, I don't know how this happens, but maybe there's a way to make it sort of a separate cost center for the village, so it kind of stands on its own. So everybody who pays into that is paying an equal amount. I don't really know the answer. I just know that we need to kind of step back and look at what it is we're doing and try to find ways to make it fair for everybody. So thank you for all the work you guys do. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it. Any other public comment? Again, this is the hearing, the public hearing for draft local law D1 of 2024, our annual tax cap override. Anyone else care to comment? Two other members of the public online.
Other
Yeah.
than to say, this is Cynthia Mann. Thank you. I've been paying attention to the budget meetings online and appreciate the work you're doing for it. So I know that it's come to a difficult point, but I thought that the taxes haven't raised in a long time, and I was confused about what Mr. Shealy just said. So, but I know you can't respond back. But anyway, thank you. I understand what's happening.
Any other public comment? Going once. Going twice and a half. And I would entertain a motion to close our public hearing on draft local law D1 of 2024.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. I will just make a couple of quick comments in response to, and thank you both, Scott and Cynthia, for your comments. Cynthia, the tax rate has not changed, and this will be the 6th year in a row with the same tax rate. But as assessments continue to go up, the $7.25 per 1,000, if you have more of those per 1,000s because your property value goes up, then your actual bill is increasing, even though our tax rate isn't going up. The village budget itself also is increasing. We're able to keep the tax rate steady because of the assessment increases, but how much we're actually spending each year certainly does increase. And to that point, and I appreciate all your comments, Scott. We had a nice conversation the other day. The one thing I would say in defense of rising costs or a rising village budget is that the lion's share of the services the village enjoys come from the village. With the singular exception, think about this, maybe I'm leaving someone out, I apologize if I am, but with the singular exception of the sheriff's department. County services generally, except, you know, on the individual basis, if someone takes advantage of a particular county department or county office. But as we talked about last week, you know, when it comes to DPW, police, fire, EMS, those are entirely, those everyday services are entirely a function of the village. But I completely agree as well that this is something we've been talking about for a couple of years. I mentioned to you last week, I've referred to it in the past as a math problem. Where when you functionally don't increase your tax base through new property and new building for essentially 3 decades, you get to a place where if you have the good fortune of living in an area that is desirable and attractive, then the only option is for people to pay more for those properties should they want to live there. And that drives up property values and assessments and so on. So this is part of the much larger conversation we've been having for a couple of years around everything from services to the comprehensive plan to zoning revisions to planning board conversations about what projects are approved or not and so on. So it's certainly a very large, long-term existential conversation, frankly, when it comes to village life. Any other responses or comments that anyone wants to make? I don't need to.
I would just add youth services and recreation as one that we don't directly provide, although we do directly fund it. So that is still within our budget, but just, you know, probably still leaving people out, but that's one that jumps to my mind.
Yeah, although increasingly it has become the village of the town that are bearing much of the burden of the operation.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I would say the town for sure. And then I think we bear a full share of that financially, but they run those services in large portion, obviously, with the exception of things run through the school, but.
Right. Any other comment? Well, if there's no other comment from the board, then I would entertain a motion to adopt draft local law D1 of 2024.
I'll second.
Any conversation?
I think the only thing I would say in conversation is just to emphasize what you pointed out, which is that we passed this law regardless of whether we need it. I think it is more a philosophical statement than a practical one. The implication here is not that we should raise taxes by any means, but just that Albany shouldn't tell us whether or not we can or cannot do that. It feels like an absurd overreach to me, and I will continue to be in favor of passing this override regardless of what our tax rates do.
Any other comments?
Maybe to add to that, I know the school is struggling right now with trying to remain under the tax cap and the Herculean effort they're going through, cutting people, cutting positions to try and stay under that. It really is, especially in the past couple of years where inflation has been 5, 6, 7%. It's irresponsible, honestly, as like a concept that this exists. So I'm more and more annoyed at it and happy to see us passing this.
Additional comments? Hearing none, then all in favor of adopting draft local law D1 of 2024, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes. Item number 6 is our first public comment period, privilege of the floor. Before we open it up to public comment on any topic, I do want to make a couple of quick acknowledgements. If my math is right, and it usually is, tonight will be the last meeting that we have joining us, our deputy clerk treasurer, who is leaving us for opportunities that could not be passed up. And so I just wanted to take a moment, Jim, to thank you for your efforts this last year plus, and some of the some of the bigger projects, particularly the IT changeover project. I think the newsletter has been well received by a great many people, and so just thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And then last but certainly not least, someone else who is, I'll use the word enjoying their last meeting with us. And that is Trustee Hannon, who is retiring from public life for now. TBD, whether we see his name on a ballot again somewhere along the line, and for what office, who knows, but this would be finishing up, what, year 6?
That's correct.
So, so thank you, Keith, for everything. Thank you for your always entertaining, but always poignant and unrelenting support for all things related to this community. Yeah. It's been needed, and I certainly appreciate it. So thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you.
And with that, we will move on to our first public comment period. If anyone present in person or online has anything that they would like to comment on, I would ask that it be village related. But it can be about anything village related. Take a few minutes. Scott, or I'm assuming that's Maureen, have anything they wanted to comment on?
Yeah, I'll comment again. I just want to respond to Cynthia a little bit, just to emphasize what Gordon said, because, and I didn't explain that very well, because I'm actually looking at the letter that I wrote. But a lot of people get confused between the tax rate and the tax increase. And, the tax rate per thousand should be adjusted accordingly based on the new assessments. So keeping the tax rate flat does not mean that taxes remain flat. And so, if taxes this year if the tax assessments go up 10%, and we keep the rate flat, taxes go up 10%. And I think there's a lot of people, most people don't pay enough attention to even notice that. But I just wanted to clarify further to emphasize what Gordon was saying, that there is a big difference. And most people, I don't think, have a real idea of what we mean by that. If you look at the detail from the school every year, you'll see that the rate is adjusted downward, usually as tax assessments go up. That's all. I just want to kind of clarify that point. So I think it's important nuance in that. All right, thanks.
Thanks, Scott.
Sure.
Any other public comment? We'll have another public comment period at the end of the meeting, should anything that occurs trigger anyone's interest and they want to stick around that long. And so we'll move on to old business. First item of old business is opening of sealed garbage bins. So we have not gone out to bid for our Wednesday morning garbage service since has it been that long?
I think so.
Been a long time since we've gone out to bid for our trash service. We have gone out to bid this year. Jessica has the bids, which she will now open as our village, the clerk side of the clerk treasurer title.
I'm gonna open them in the order they were received.
We'll open them in the order they were received, and just for anyone keeping track in person or at home, municipalities are generally speaking, unless there's exigent circumstances, required to accept the lowest bid for any contracted service. Unless again, there's some odd outlier of a circumstance. So with that in mind,
So this is my first rodeo. Do I open this and hand it to you with the contents? What do we do here?
normally we don't always do these in public meeting, but
Okay. So it's open.
yes, it's been 13 years. So the first bid form is from our current contractor, Casella Waste Management. That is dumpster pricing. So hauling costs. This is for a 1-year period from June 1 of 24 till May 31st of 2025 with the option for renewal. Hauling cost of, I'm gonna make some notes here. Hauling cost of $63,936 even. That's the annual cost that's a monthly rate of $5,328 even. And garbage tags at $12 per sheet. Okay, next.
Okay.
Jeff, how many did we receive total?
2.
Second bid is. You can read out loud. Does anyone want the dumpster price? Anyone on the board with the dumpster price?
I don't anticipate that we would award a final contract tonight, right? We'll have time to look through these.
Yes.
Okay.
Second bid is from Redline Disposal for the same contract year, June 1, 2024 through May 31st, 2025, with the option for renewal. Hauling cost of $36,475. That's a monthly rate of $3,039.58. Garbage tags at $1.10 per sheet of 5.
There's usually what, 12 on a sheet?
Right. So quick minute. That would be a $2.64 equivalent at 12 per sheet. Okay, our annual organizational meeting is April the 8th, second Monday of April. That is where we do all of our appointments and contract awards. So thank you to Casella and Redline for submitting bids, and the board will make a determination and prior to and announce at our annual organizational meeting on April the 8th. Any questions from the board on the bids or bid process?
We'll get those copies sent to us.
Yeah, Jess, will you
Yes.
scan and
Then I should point out that both applicants or both proposal representatives are here, and I'm sure they would be available for further questions to our guys. Get through contact.
I assume there's contact info on there.
Yeah, there's mine.
board questions for the moment? Next item of old business is contracts for funding community organizations. You were Marcia.
It's me.
Okay.
So, and it's not controversial. It's, this is all the research. This is all the research that I did. If you can see on the Dropbox how the contracts are written. This is how I saw that they should be written. I contacted Allison Evans at FoodNet. I did the one for the Historical Society. I did the one for FoodNet and the pantry and the library. So I don't know if the board wants to run these by Guy to see if they're written the way that they should be written, but there were some things, I think, in the original contracts that especially at the end of the contracts, it said that what these particular organizations are going to supply for the village for our funding. It also states that they are an independent contractor, not an employee or an agent of the village. Indemnifies to hold the village harmless from all liability of any nature whatsoever. And that the agreement cannot be changed unless in writing. So, I think this is probably the proper way to go about writing the contracts for funding. Does anybody have any questions?
So were they all the same? I looked through just the library one. I didn't look through them all. And I only looked through it right before today because I didn't realize they were there. So I'm sorry I didn't
Oh, no,
spend more
that's
time with
okay.
it.
Yeah, they're all pretty much the same. All it's, the only thing that would be different pertaining to like FoodNet provides delivery service, so that's what they
Right.
they include and the things that the library does. And what we are in support of for these particular organizations.
So in the library one, I think the piece that I see that's missing is the audit function.
Okay,
So
now, yeah, I do understand that, and I think that the library can, we kind of went around, but not, I didn't go around about that, but discuss that, just basically saying there is no way that they keep track. I don't know if Cynthia can,
So it's the trickiness here is, at least in my view, that you want to tailor the contract so that it's very narrow. So you're paying for, like the Youth Commission has a similar contract with the library and they fund the summer reading program specifically. And the audit function doesn't apply to the library as a whole. It applies to that programming.
right,
So if we narrow this from rather just we'll fund all library functions.
okay,
If we do it that way, then we have to be able to audit all library functions, which is
crazy,
crazy. So I think, and I'm channeling Guy a little bit here. We went back and forth on this and many other things.
okay,
But I believe that he would recommend strongly, let's say, that we have that. I don't think it's a big change. It would just be the addition of one thing and then, talking with the librarian to decide on a program that would fit, that would be good, that they would.
okay, so it does have to be a specific,
It doesn't have to, but it constrains the audit piece. Otherwise, we
Right.
have to legally, at least, like, not that we would ever do this, but we would have to legally have the right to audit the functions of the library more generally, which is like not something we want to get into.
yeah, so when I sent Laura an email, she just basically said that they would just be adding to their. She gave me a specific thing that they would
Oh,
do,
perfect.
so
Yeah,
that's what I
perfect.
would include.
I think so.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
she
I
had
would
a.
just, all right, so then I would just add that in as another,
that would
and
be
she
great.
told me exactly what they would be using the money for this year, so I'll just add that in, so that it's very specific.
Yeah, I
Okay,
think that would be great. And then like have that replace one
okay,
and then maybe add a 1B or something that they will report on that.
okay,
That will verify it. Or what.
okay, yeah, because
Right, it used to
basically
be
they
that-
could they can verify exactly what they added to.
Right, and
There.
they used to come in and as part of their annual request would share their annual report and give sort of a brief synopsis. So the guy was satisfied with that as a method, so it doesn't have to be a big thing
A
by any
big
means,
thing.
but I
Okay,
think like a 1B
all right,
would be,
yep, I can modify
get us
that,
through all the hoops.
okay. Anybody else?
Your thoughts or comments?
I mean, I do think we should have Guy take a look at it at the end, but I think with what you all have been talking with him, hopefully we get pretty close on the first try and take it from there.
Okay,
Maybe that's optimistic. We'll see.
It was a strange conversation with Guy. It was very circuitous. Like
okay,
he started out caring very deeply and it was hard to read. So I'll be
Yeah.
interested to see what he says. I think this will be perfect though.
okay. And like I said, Laura did give me a specific what they would use the money for, so that's perfect, I can just put that in there.
Yeah, ideally it's something that they will do
Okay,
annually. But
you think maybe we should get back to that method of having representatives just come? I mean, since we've already determined the ones that we can fund and the ones that we can't, we can obviously invite them back, right? To,
so we dispensed with that practice because it was inefficient.
Okay,
And then we replaced it with this process where we talk about it for like 20 hours. So I feel like maybe there's, there's something to be learned from the old ways in this instance.
okay. Keep it simple, stupid. Okay, got it. Okay, thank you.
Anything else on these contracts with community organizations? Next item of old business, we have a quote from MRB to submit a water infrastructure improvement grant for us.
Yes, so this is our ongoing, never-ending attempts to find more funding opportunities for improvement to water infrastructure. The primary focus being the areas of the water infrastructure that we did not touch during the improvements in addition of the wells down at Organic. So primarily the stuff at Frontenac Creek, or Frontenac Point, that also then comes up into the village. There's a storage tank and a pump house and a couple of different things there. This is a resubmission from last year. And I think actually last year was already a resubmission from the year prior. Anyhow, the initial quote was 4,500. I pushed back and said, we're resubmitting. Why is it so high? And they were able to come down another 1,000, which was good, though confusing that we had to push back a bit, but here we are. So this is a quote for 3,500 for their time and to resubmit yet again for a WIA grant, and cross our fingers this time around. So that's kind of the song and dance. I would make a motion that we accept this quote from MRB for a WIA grant application.
Second.
A motion and a second to accept MRB's proposal to write and submit a weed grant for us for $3,500. Any comments or questions? Hearing none, then all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed. Okay. Next item of old business is a resolution for assigning addresses to Crescent Bay.
So you see that in the Dropbox. I'm happy to answer if anyone wants to know the theory behind it, but I will point out one change, which is that there are in fact parcel third from the bottom on the list, so it's 9.1-2.12, currently 15 Crescent Way. There's another building there, so it's now will be identified as 15 Crescent Way and 3 Crescent Way, which I believe is reflected in your Dropbox already. But that changed this morning.
Okay. I will not read this whole resolution, but just so everyone is aware, for purposes of emergency dispatch and communication in the 911 system, which is operated out of Tompkins County Department of Emergency Response. It is necessary to have address designations, and unless or until the law changes, address designations remain the purview of the local municipality to set. And so we are setting addresses for 15 locations.
And essentially I conferred with the chief of police and of course the stakeholders. And so the idea is the primary entrance would be from South Street. And since common practice is to put even on the right, that's where it goes, right? So you come in and there's 2 below, there's a little person that goes all the way up high, and the 2 inner pieces are the odd. These are the big ones. And then there is a small parcel there. So that's the entrance is actually East Crescent Way from South Street per the police chief's recommendation. And then from Pennsylvania is West Crescent Way, which is why one address in West Crescent.
Those are the little string
Yeah,
pieces that
because
connect.
that's where the front of the house
Got it.
faces.
Yeah.
If you call the whole thing Crescent Way, you could get lost as to which. Anyway, that's what I suggest. And the stakeholders were fine with it.
So I'll just say briefly that I will abstain from this, just because this is a request from NHS.
Mhm.
But without looking at a map, I also have to say that 2 West Crescent Way and 2 Crescent Way is baffling to me. I do not understand that. I haven't looked at the map of that since it was in front of the planning board. It's been a while, but
Especially since the one to your right is gonna be to your north.
I'll have to look up.
Right, since one is north and south, it's pulling to the right. Your right hand is now north. That's okay. If chief and the stakeholders are all okay with it, then
Do you, I
who
mean,
am I to? Bigger-
we can certainly make one be 2 and one, we could start the numbering. At 4 Crescent Way. If you want me to redo it, you see, so it would, we could eliminate and just start at 4 and then it would go up. Give it that as well.
I would think it would be.
Without looking at a map.
If you start on.
Are the 2 twos close to each other?
No, they're not opposite ends. One's on West Crescent Way and
Then
one's
I don't
on actual Crescent Way.
think I care.
Oh, I see.
As long as they're not across the street from each other, like one West Main and.
So actually, it would
West
be easier,
Main.
you know, I could do this right now, because there's gonna be, so the thing is, there could be all those numbers in between, right? Some of these parcels are able to be subdivided, which is why you have a jump in numbers,
Mhm.
so. You would have to go to like crazy, you could go crazy in town on West Crescent, and just start at 100. Do you know what I mean? Which would also be equally as strange. Just so complicated. You all are ready to adopt it.
Yeah.
If the police chief is okay with it, and all of the stakeholders, including the property owners, okay with it, then I say we don't need to be.
Okay. They could always, I think, in a future
Attempting to,
petition to change the address if they needed to.
Be attempting to micromanage someone else's process.
Okay.
And so I would entertain a motion to assign and adopt the street addresses for the following tax parcels or for the listed tax parcels as presented.
So moved.
We have a second.
Second.
Any other comments, questions, discussion? Suggestions for numbering? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Very good. I am abstaining, just,
Yeah.
sorry, any abstention.
You reminding me so I don't.
New business, we have some EMS equipment to purchase, it looks like,
Yes, so potentially.
potentially purchase.
We have, as evidently often happens, come April 1st, companies are trying to offload things and make sales, something about the schedule of the rhythm of sales and medical equipment. I don't know exactly the nuance to it, but that tends to be the rhythm of it. One that Joel found and has been looking for a long time is a way to replace our auto pulses for our ambulances. This is a piece of gear that when he first started was one of the primary targets of reevaluating. You know, we've always had the equipment replacement schedules, right? But it generally only applies to vehicles. Joel and I started to update our replacement schedules. We included the stretchers. That's why we purchased the stretchers before. The auto pulse is sort of next on that priority list, but it is not yet budgeted, and those replacement lists are not yet budgeted. So this is here very much as a question. That said, this is a fairly essential piece of gear. This is essentially, it does CPR basically, right? But it does perfect CPR every time without letting up or fatiguing. And the survivable, like the rate of surviving with this versus human applied or human executed CPR is drastically increased. So we have now, if we sign this agreement, the opportunity to save about $11,000 over 4 years on this piece of equipment, but we have not budgeted for it. So we would lose money as a village. This is one of those situations that we always talk about with the town, where it's like changing conditions happen. we have to respond in real time. We can't necessarily change our contracts with the town as we go. We would, of course, be able to budget for it and have a regular replacement schedule next year. It's also a substantial piece of gear, so it's about $45,000. So it's one that we need to replace. We need to replace fairly soon. This would allow us to save because of the discounts applied, again, due to just the bizarre weirdness of the sales cycle. It would save about 11,000 if we sign the contract now.
So we would only
That's basically the backup.
we would only be, as a village, we would only be eating the first payment looks of it.
Yes.
So we can budget for the rest. start
Yep.
this fall.
Yep, that's exactly right. I will say that it is my recommendation that we do this. I just want to be open about sort of where
Yeah.
we stand and what
What's
it
the
looks like.
expiration on that? Like, what's the life use of that piece of equipment?
So like everything in EMS and medical gear, there's sort of the recommended,
Mhm.
right? And then when you actually have to. This is honestly, I don't know what the real useful life would be. Our current one, I don't believe has ever been replaced. So you can stretch these in the same way that you can with a vehicle, right? I mean, it's
Yeah,
not that.
I'm just
dissimilar.
wondering on equipment because I do know, like with the fire company. If you order certain specific types of equipment, even if it sits in a box
Right.
and you never take it out, it expires.
So this is not like that.
Okay.
Yeah, yes, no, this is not that kind of thing. No, it's a mechanical device, that, you can
Okay.
repair and you.
I'm all for it. I'm just curious, I'm kind of thinking through the like town conversation.
Mm,
And is there a place to either one, just at the very least reiterate again, right, as we often do, another example of where these things are not as cut and dry as we think. Alternatively, I wonder if there's an opportunity to say like, here's our budget, but we already paid for this thing out of cycle. Let's factor that into the contracts with the town. It might not be worth it
Didn't we
for,
already eat something too?
we regularly do.
Yeah,
mean,
but I mean, we
It
already,
yo-yos a bit, right?
to
I
the
mean,
tune of
there's-
$10,000 of something else. Can't remember the last 2 meetings we did. It was something that Gordon was like, remind me. That we just ate another nugget of this.
Oh geez,
I
maybe.
kind of feel like that in this budget cycle. I feel like there was a personnel something maybe.
Yeah,
where we
yes, that's exactly what it was.
Thought we'd have to go above what we had budgeted for, so I can't remember.
Yeah, and it was like to the tune of $10,000, I think.
Okay, I don't remember the
It
details.
escapes my memory now, but it's not impossible, and it does happen. I mean, in the long view, it happens every year. We go. I mean, sometimes we're under and sometimes we're over, and it oscillates pretty wildly, primarily based on personnel costs. Right, who had overtime, who was out.
Right.
We have to double cover things like that, but
So I know like Roden has shown kind of like overtime flows,
Right.
ebbs and flows. Maybe this is just another one to add to the list and reiterate. There's like a balance here between trying to be too down to the penny about everything, and then we really kind of need to do that on both sides if we're going to be strict on one side or the other. Or we kind of continue the narrative of this is what we're talking about, when like sometimes you win some, sometimes you lose some. But just to consider that side of it.
yeah, I mean, I think. I don't know, it's interesting in light of what Mr. Sheapley just mentioned, right, as far as like protecting and prioritizing village taxpayers. I think there's a lesson here that I think maybe I need to take to heart, honestly, which is, every year at this village and town joint meeting, we present a budget that I think is on some level, maybe more appropriate for our internal budgeting process rather than for an external contract setting budget, right? We are always as close and as exacting as we can be in that budget that we share. And I think the idea is just out of respect for our partners who contract and who have their own budget and tax worries, we try and do that. But things like this are definitely a reminder to, prioritize our own budget process,
Yeah.
especially given the time lag. And I do think in the long term, it comes out in the wash, but we are behind by a substantial margin the last time you did that calculation, right? I forget what the number was.
I think we're a little closer to even than we think on EMS, but behind.
I think we're behind but catching up, right? Like we're pretty close.
And somewhat offset by fire, we're a little bit ahead.
Right.
I mean, to that, and I'm not suggesting this, but it's been a long time since we talked about it. So to Scott Cheveley's point, channeling Brad Pinsky's circa 2010, right? The village can set any price it wants for the services for which we contract out. We have chosen the route of quote partnership that's not partnership. They are not partners, they are customers.
Right.
When our relations are very good, we refer to them as partners, and when they're not so good, we refer to them as customers. But the reality is the towns contract for a service. And there are some limitations from the state comptroller about how much you can make over and above your budget. But if our budget is X, then to Scott Shepley's point, we could theoretically say, it costs this much to run this department, and we're charging you all for it. And I'm not suggesting that we do that, but there is a lot more that we could potentially do if the goal becomes first and foremost and above everything else, the protection of the taxpayer.
Right,
The flip side to that, and the reason why I'm not advocating for it, is if we set that as our goal and a municipality eventually says, no, thank you, then we either have to cut the service or we absorb all that cost back onto the taxpayer.
Or we start contracting with this new municipality for them to provide us EMS service.
Well, assuming that that's not the case, assuming that the
assuming they
municipality-
start up their own, they're just.
Assuming that the municipality says it's not a mandated service yet, I think that may happen this year actually, but. In this hypothetical world where it's not a mandated service, so we're simply not gonna provide it. Right. Which may be very unpopular with their residents. Unless their tax bill is so high that their residents say, we'll take our chances. So that's the big tug of war.
Right,
I also think, I mean, we talked about this years ago, right? The question of other municipalities aside from the ones that we currently contract with joining, right? And to what degree, like you can build around a wall around the village, you can build a wall around like our founding cohort, we'll call them. You can build a wall wherever you want, right? And then how do we start recouping different amounts of money based on growth? And I think Scott is specifically referring to our regional growth, right? How do we start recouping money outside of not necessarily our current contractees, but future? And I think that's something very, very interesting to think about as we move forward. That's something that we certainly need to pursue.
Just to, I know Scott's not here, but I mean, I've been going back and forth with him. I think part of what he would point out is that when you look at the way we're structuring EMS cost sharing by call volume, that makes a lot of intuitive sense. But then if you look at how that plays out with different tax bases across the different municipalities, we end up paying quite a bit more per $1,000 in the village because of the smaller tax base versus something like the town, where even though they have more call volume than us, they have significantly more tax base than us.
but that service is always available, whether we get a call or not, is the point,
Right.
right?
And so like they're paying. Trying to remember the numbers, we're going back and forth, and I wasn't sure I agreed with how the numbers were playing out, but they're paying quite a bit less, maybe half as much, maybe less.
By property, we
Per $100,000, yeah, per like assessment. If you took their bill and
just because they have a higher.
and it's, in my assumption's all about the assessment, but it's just
a bizarre distinction to make that way.
He's talking about an assessment weighted model as opposed to a call weighted model. Which we.
To what effect though? We're serving people. This is not like fire where we're protecting buildings.
agreed. I'm not sure I'm not arguing for the position necessarily, but throwing out, it's an interesting way to conceive of the costs and how it plays out on people's actual pocketbook at the end of the day, right? And so you're right, like it's not the same as fire where like we're protecting assessed values almost directly. And so it made a lot more sense to go towards an assessment based model. but we've talked about different ways of thinking about EMS and how that works and what does that look like? And yeah,
Did we ever, I feel like we didn't get this far down the rabbit hole, but did we ever look at, in addition to call volume, did we ever look at a population? Model? We
Try that.
did, so I feel like you and I went back and forth several times with several different iterations, and it was. So the problem with population is that, like, is what Marcia's mentioning, right? That what we really need to fund is readiness. So everything's kind of population inverted. Right, is like our readiness is what's valuable, not our actual calls. That is where it becomes very, very tricky.
yeah, I mean, I think,
But we did, I believe, include, this was when we were talking about fire, right? That we were going back and forth about this. So I believe we included assessment population. I tried to include assessment or a population to area, as I mean, those assessments relative to this. But I don't recall. I think we tried. I mean, we had thrown everything at it for a little while, and
It's kind of like having insurance,
Coverage,
like having insurance.
mileage.
You may not use it,
right, yeah.
but you
yeah.
have it because you need it when it's, you know, you want it available.
But no, my attempts were always completely unsuccessful, and it ended with the village paying $2, and you know, Ulysses in particular paying 5 million. And you know, obviously that's an exaggeration because that's bigger than the budget, but you get what I'm saying. I mean, it really, as soon as we started to account, particularly distance, was huge, right? Because the village is very small. And the reality is that it doesn't really reflect the cost because, you know, if you drive 5 miles to a call that takes 3 hours, it's no more, you know, the weighting is really out of whack with the reality of it. Because you may drive to cars 5 times in a day, but then each one is a fairly simple call. You may drive to Juniper and do
Well, that's what-
transports.
I was talking with you just about like total call time, you know, time out of the station essentially.
Yeah,
Maybe that's an interesting play, but I don't know if we have those numbers, but maybe we do.
Which
with
would be
the-
longer if they had to go farther, right?
we just started talking about this, and I think there's more to
Right.
tease here, but my concern is that like the call volume model is dangerous as a taxing municipality because it varies wildly. Right, so we've run into these issues occasionally where someone's will dip or rise unexpectedly, and as a cost that's paid for with tax dollars, that's very difficult to manage. Particularly if you're trying to stay under the tax cap or something like that, it's very hard to have these wild variations. In a world where we're accounting for call, like time on a call, I think those variations would be much greater. Right, I think we would see much higher because there will be calls that are just really, really long rescue calls, right, where you're on standby. And then there's a rescue and someone comes out, you know, I mean, you can imagine them dragging on and on and on. So I would worry about that, but I don't know, there's definitely more to tease here as far as like, is this useful?
Yeah, I mean, this
have
is-
some wariness based on our last attempt.
I mean, this is all the same things, like the cost of the fire cost sharing. I was even just like looking at my notes
Yeah.
this today from like when I presented to the towns, and the same things, like the lack of stability was a huge problem.
Right.
And then this kind of ephemeral, like not ephemeral, whatever question of equitable,
Right.
equality around all of it, and is calls really getting to what's the driver of actual cost of service and how it makes sense to really split it up. It seems not quite right, like, and in fire, it's probably even more extreme because like most of what you're going for is just the fact that you have them there, right?
Right.
That there is a fire call to actually call. EMS is a bit different just because the volume of calls and the fact that they're kind of out much more frequently, I think.
Yeah.
But even still, like, I think there's a lot to sort out. I don't know. I mean, my like math nerdiness, I'm happy to like dive in more with you if you're curious,
I
but
will throw things at you as long as you're willing to play the game. It is, like I said, I'm a little wary because it is a bit of a rabbit. But, you know, I like spreadsheets. We can try, we can see what's out there. Certainly with Joel on board now, I think we'll have a much better administrative like capacity from that, you know, right? So we can sort of throw out some ideas and we'll be able to flesh them out and follow it through a little bit, so that we can certainly try.
I mean, the way on the fire we ended up kind of philosophically splitting it as the cost between like just being there. With like the cost of the building, the apparatus or like, the vehicles, the people just on staff. Versus the cost of kind of being out like on a call and then trying to think that, I think maybe potentially think about those as separately weighted, right? Like call volume could go towards your call cost, but to your point of being prepared is really the thing. That's a large part of the budget is just having the people on staff and ready.
Right, well, that was the thing, yeah, that was all fixed versus variable costs, right? Was
Right.
Like the premise of that.
Right.
And I think there is room, this is sort of what Roden and I were trying to figure out. I never know it's 5 years ago. But it was, like I said, it was hard, so that sort of like. Vague and hard to pin down question of equity, especially like historic equity. We don't want to drastically change things just because it's stressful. You know, it really is hard to define why that feels so important, but it does.
Well, there's ways to.
And everything we came up with was just wildly different.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, you want to find something that seems like, you want to come from a place that seems philosophically defensible and then also like work into it over time.
But there's room for that. I mean, we could weight the last 10-year average of calls. I mean, we could heavily anchor it in the status quo so that there's no drastic changes. There's certainly, we could do more thinking there for sure. Ad nauseam, probably. But to bring us back to this purchase. Any thoughts on moving forward? Any questions? I think Roden put it exactly right. It's a question of eating 11,000 this year, basically, and then I shouldn't say eating, but without the
Our cost.
recourse to those contracts.
One thought for this fall is we could potentially build in. Ben's comment, we could build in the 11,000 we're gonna pay now. Just into the budget to recoup part of it.
Mhm.
And then maybe we leave this in as a line item forward. Now we have a 4-year replacement cycle.
Yes, no, this will be, so that 11,000 is recurring for 4 years.
No, I understand it, but if we make the number. 22%, so 22% of 11, and subtract that out, so make the auto pulse line 20,000.
Oh, I see, so we can do it.
Always 4.5 years from now, to see ready to buy the next one. Whatever it costs then. And we'll have to adjust that line as it gets more expensive. Then,
Yeah.
now great, instead of
I like that.
replacing it when it's worn out every 10 years, we just get it once we start treating this piece of equipment like we do fire trucks and just get it.
Right, no, exactly. Yeah, and that's what we do with the stretchers at this point too. So I think that's the direction we need to go, and we could build this 11,000 into that next 4 years. Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Any other thoughts, comments?
I mean, if it sounds like we're on board, I think we need a
Yeah.
resolution to authorize Roden to sign the contract, and that's really all we need at this point.
You can authorize Joel to sign.
All right,
It's a department purchase, basically.
that suits me. So in that case, I would authorize.
We're approving it, so procurement policy wise, we're approving the purchase. So Joel is the department head.
So I would move that we authorize EMS Administrator Joel Fay to sign a contract with Zoll for an auto pulse as presented in our packet.
Second.
A motion and a second, friendly amendment, I think it's 2 auto pulses, yeah.
This is, I believe, just one.
First,
I have misread.
Finalizing agreement acquired.
Oh, no, 2. Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, 2. Yep, I accept.
Thank you. Cindy.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're gonna get 2 new auto pulses. Any other comments or questions? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. Second item of new business, water and sewer customer guide. This is one of the things that Jen put together for us. Thanks again, Jen, for this. This does not require any type of board approval. It's more for board information. It has been through the always watchful eyes of our village attorney. And this will be, where is it?
I did just recently add it in. I don't think it was in the Dropbox before. At the very bottom. water
It's the
sewer.
last one.
There it
Yeah.
is. This will be available in hard copy and online. This is actually the culmination of a couple of, so 2 or 3 years ago. Guy actually suggested to me that we needed to have some more verbiage in writing about who's responsible for what, particularly when it comes to burst pipes and water main breaks and whatnot. So this is very useful. So thanks again, Jen. And if anyone sees anything that needs to be added in the future, don't tell Jen. Someone else's.
She'll be busy.
All right. Second public comment period. Make up that executive session.
Yeah, don't say that out loud. What's going on here?
I think Maureen is online. If you have anything you'd like to let us hear about, Maureen, please do. Okay. I would then entertain a motion to go into executive session to discuss a couple of personnel matters.
May I make a public comment?
You may. Speaking of making up for being.
I'll be brief. Did want to offer my thanks for, I guess, beginning with Rorden, who appointed me to this board in 2018 to a very full village hall. If you remember, 2018 was a more contentious, well, I don't know if it was more, it was a contentious time. And there was a lot of interest in who he was going to appoint. And I only heard, in a very full room, I only heard a few groans and one noticeable, "You've got to be joking." So I think, I hopefully I turned those critics around in the last 6 years, but no, honestly, I wanted to say that I joined this board fairly quickly after moving here. And so I thank the community for accepting me as a representative, but also just feel incredibly fortunate to have had the opportunity to see how the place in which I live and raise my children operates and sustains itself. And I think that's something I wish everybody could experience at least a little bit, to gain an appreciation like I have for what it takes to keep this place running and to plan its future. And to that, I just have the utmost respect for everybody around this table. I've watched you all work incredibly hard at a lot of different things. I haven't been around as long as people like Rorden, but it sure seems to me like there was an awful lot accomplished in the last 6 years. And I give all of that credit to you all and none to myself. Though I would like to say thank you also to Chief Nelson, who I had the honor of working with Rorden to bring him in. So thank you to Chief for really coming in and making my job really easy, because when I heard our chief of almost 50 years was retiring a month into my term, that seemed pretty daunting. And so thank you, Chief Nelson. And thank you to Mackenzie Covert, who's an officer that's been here as long as I've been here and that I've really enjoyed getting to know, and just have a ton of respect for what she does in our community and what she does as an officer and how she goes above and beyond. So thank you, Mackenzie. But lastly, just want to say that several people in my time on this board have commented on how impressed they are by how well we all get along. And those are usually people that are coming from other places to live here where that wasn't the case in the town they were living in before. So just have so much respect for all of you, and for someone who always wanted to try getting into politics. I just seriously can't imagine a better group to do it with. And I have great, I can leave this board with no concerns about it, whose hands the future is in. So thank you so much for letting me ride your coattails for 6 years. And getting to be part of this group and seeing firsthand all the incredible work you've done and will continue to do that most people won't see and haven't seen. And we've taken a lot of arrows together, both in person and on social media. So it's been a privilege to serve with you all, and best of luck with everything. I know you'll kill it. That's it.
Thank you.
That's all I got to say.
Thank you.
And with that, I would entertain a motion to go into executive session and discuss a couple of personnel matters.
So
Second.
Yes, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
he's got to